I share the
Yep.
slides.
Yeah, it's got the presentation view.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, How to Tell a Story That People Will Remember. My name is Emily Deshane. I'm one of the TEDx Lausanne speaker coaches. I'm joined by my colleague, Christopher, and we're going to be guiding you tonight on this webinar. Thanks also for joining us on a beautiful summer's evening. We know that it's difficult to be inside when the weather's so nice, so thanks very much for joining us. And we just wanted to let you know that in terms of timing tonight, we're going to be doing about an hour's worth of content here, give or take, and then we'll be trying to leave some time for question and answer. We should be wrapped up by about 7:30. Thanks so much for joining us. So let's kick off. As I mentioned, my name is Emily. When I'm not a TEDx Lausanne coach, I am working in partnerships for a UN organization. I have a background in theater, public speaking, and international relations, and I've been with TEDx Lausanne now for about 6 years. Let me also introduce you to my colleague, Christopher. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Emily, and good evening to everyone. Very happy to see so many people who took the time on this beautiful evening to join us. Now, my name is Christopher, as Emily so kindly already introduced me, and I've studied at the École de Lausanne. I've experience in international leadership, and I'm a 10-year veteran of the Toastmasters organization, for those who are familiar with it. I've been for 3 years with TEDx Lausanne, also as a speaker coach, so a teammate of Emily's, and there are more than just the two of us, but we have the pleasure of facilitating this webinar tonight for you. In my day job, I'm also a speaker and communication coach, and I'm driven by the motto that I believe anyone can be a storyteller, and tonight we will try to get you one step closer to becoming one as well. Let me dive right into what we have on the menu for you tonight. But before I do this, I would like also to warmly welcome Damien Gauthier, our team member, who is so kind as to moderate the chat function tonight. So you can actually post your questions in the chat, and he will either answer them right on the spot if he can, or he will collect them for our Q&A session at the end. So please be courageous, ask your questions, and we will try to answer them all. Now, in terms of content for storytelling, we want to talk to you about why storytelling is so effective. And not to spoil too much, but it has something to do with ancient Greece and with campfires. We will talk to you about what storytelling is. As a first hint, we will need a hero.
Doesn't everybody? I think we all do.
I think we all do, yes. And we will tell you more about it in just a minute. We will explain to you how to tell stories, but not just stories, but stories that people will remember. Because our aim as speaker coaches is to make sure that what you say on stage is remembered by people, and obviously today, for you to use in any context, stories as a way to engage. And then we will go into tactics for storytelling. So really tangible stuff of what you can do to make your story more engaging and more memorable. And by the end, we'll finish off with some examples that you can watch or read to get further into the topic. And then, of course, as I already said, we will have a wonderful Q&A session where we hope that you have some tough questions for us. Those are always the most interesting ones, aren't they, Emily?
There are no bad questions.
Exactly.
Feel free to pose any that you have.
Exactly. Damien is ready for you at his keyboard, and he will master the chat. A quick word on TEDx Lausanne, which is obviously very close to our hearts. TEDx Lausanne has been around for a couple of years. To be specific, for a decade already. They grow up fast, don't they? And we had actually planned to celebrate our 10th anniversary this year with our event, even larger and more interesting and more ideas to spread than ever. And then, as to all of us, our not so dear friend COVID-19 happened. So unfortunately, we will not be able to conduct the event in a way that is safe for everyone and that we feel we can take the responsibility for. But having said that, we will do it in 2021. And we have even more time to make it even better and to select even more carefully the ideas that are truly worth spreading with you and everyone else who is following us and who likes to attend the events. These events that we organize are in English, which by no means is a decision to exclude any people who prefer French or Spanish or you name it. I will not go into all the languages of the world, but one of the reasons why we've decided to conduct it in English is because of the views you as a speaker can potentially get online. And online content, as English is the international language, simply receives more views and clicks, which is one of the goals we try to help you to achieve, because at the event, it's the first step, which is important, of course, but the audience is some 500 attendees plus. But online, you can potentially go into the millions, maybe in the tens of millions. There are talks that have been watched that often. And this is just why we've selected English, because it's a success factor. We usually hold one event per year that sees 15 talks and performances, but there are other opportunities to engage with amazing contents and ideas worth spreading. One of them being the TEDx salons. Think of them as a more intimate setting that we organize 2 to 3 times a year with 1 or 2 speakers, like a tiny desk concert, really, where you can attend in an evening with fewer people on a specific topic. And last but by no means least, there is the TEDx Lausanne Women section. It is an event that is tailored to women, not exclusively for female speakers, but tailored to women in content, and it has seen great success over the last years. And that overall is a bit what TEDx Lausanne is all about.
So Chris, let's dive in and get into some of the content for tonight's webinar. We're going to start with the question of why is storytelling important? And I'm going to kick off by asking you to look at the next slide and see what these 3 individuals have in common. If you'll check it out, you can see in the next slide that there is a statue. We've got a statue of ancient times. We've got a gentleman in the middle, and then a young girl by a campfire. Actually, all of these people really represent the history of storytelling. We look from left to right at ancient Greece, Plato, Socrates, other orators that command large audiences and use these stories and anecdotes to explain everything from politics to philosophy. They are using storytelling in a way that engages the audience, and this is several thousand years ago already. When we look at the middle, this gentleman is a griot. It's a traditional role from West Africa, Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, and that tradition dates back thousands of years. They're a specialist in their community, actually, and dedicated to preserving the history of their tribes through oral storytelling and song. It's completely done by memory. It's absolutely incredible, and it actually continues even in modern times. So really this idea of storytelling as a way to pass on knowledge or to keep memories of your ancestors in a really concrete way. And then obviously, as we move to the campfire, we've got a young girl around this fire. Maybe she's with her family, maybe she's with her friends, and people are sharing stories. We are captivated from a very young age about the passing of knowledge through stories. And this is one of the ways that people can engage, and you can kind of encourage a sort of collective experience. And this has obviously been around a very long time. As we move forward and we look to storytelling generally, we find that actually there's a lot of science behind storytelling about why it works. Maybe I'll let Chris explain some of the biological components.
Yes, thank you, Emily. And you're right. There is a scientific aspect that can actually help us understand. So first of all, when we talk to someone, and I believe all of us have an example of people who are not telling stories really. They are bombarding us with information. It's difficult to understand, and we shut off. If we are one of these speakers for now, we might observe the audience taking out their mobile phones, chatting to the neighbor, or some courageous ones even sneaking out for a coffee or a smoke break. And what happens there is that these incoherent information, so too much energy is needed to comprehend you as a speaker, actually triggers the lizard brain, the flight reflex. So people switch off. Now, stories allow you to make content more engaging, more easy to understand for our brains. So you speak immediately to the human brain and you can engage with it. meaning people can more easily follow and they will not actually subject to the fight and flight reflex. And secondly, stories allow for us to communicate more easily non-verbally. There are gestures, body language, voice, tone, pitch, you name it, that of course we use when we speak, no matter what structure, but stories live from these non-verbal clues. And stories for us as speakers make it easier to use those. And thus we communicate on different levels. And also scientifically, it has been found that we communicate or we hear any information based 70% on what is not said. So everything that's not our words. And if you think about it, the structural gestures become incredibly important. But that's not all on the scientific side, because there is also a cultural element. Emily, what's that about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about a cultural approach to storytelling is that, as I mentioned in the history part, there's something very ancestral about the way to pass information in this kind of a format. Why is that? It's about what was used at the time. It's about something that's sort of in our traditions to do so. The other thing that's really important is that humans like to be entertained. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're talking about an actor who's on stage, or you're talking about someone who's giving a presentation at work, or you're talking about being that person at the dinner party who is, keeping everybody on the edge of their seat, telling you about the latest thing that's happened. Humans like to be entertained. And storytelling is a great way to entertain people because it's a format that we all inherently understand. There's something really important about that curiosity in when you tell a story, you get to a point where you say, well, what happens next? Well, then what? It engages people in a way that just talking at them doesn't. And that's what we're going to talk a bit more about today when we look at how you can really use storytelling in many different aspects of your life.
Exactly. So now that we've talked about...
Where do we head from here, Chris? I mean, this is the question. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how we get there and why storytelling is important. Where are we going now?
Yes, where are we going now? We're now going to explain to you what storytelling really is. We know why it's important, and now it's about what is it actually. It's a word we all use, and we've heard a lot, and in our work we use it a lot. However, I'm not sure that we all have the same understanding. We tried to put some light on this question. Now, storytelling is basically composed of three fundamental elements. The first one is the narration point. Stories start right in the middle of the action. There is rarely any surrounding describing elements, any long introduction. We as a listener are being taken right into the action in the middle of it, standing in the chaotic marketplace, hearing people scream around us. Then there is a hero we need. A person, a character we identify with that carries the journey, that lives through an adventure. And I'll lose a couple of explanation points on that in just a minute. And lastly, there is the element of empathy. We need to be able to relate to the hero, to think that the hero is like us or the other way around, that we are like the hero. And this is not purely based on ability. Sometimes we have Superman or other heroes that we don't actually share these capabilities with, but it's on an emotional level, that the hero feels hopeless, that we can understand, so we connect with that hero. But let me put that into an example. Because actually, you all know this already. You've heard it a million times. You've watched it on the couch for hours.
Storytelling isn't new.
Storytelling isn't new. Exactly. It's actually one of the eldest strategies and structures we use, as Emily already told you about just a few moments ago. Let's take, for example, the movie Matrix with the hero Neo. He's the chosen one, or at least for the first part of the sequel, he's being told that he's the chosen one. Now, that's our hero. And the hero's journey always runs along the same parts. There's firstly the awakening, the call for something bigger, the realization that you have a mission. In the Matrix movies, it's when Neo is being released or rescued from the salvation plans of the machines that use the human bodies for energy. So he gets pulled out of these bubbles, if you remember. And then the hero starts on his or her journey. In the Matrix movies, is Neo being exposed to training, being explained what the Matrix is about and what he's supposed to be able to do. And then there is a first obstacle or several that the hero has to overcome. In the movie, it is him not really being able to bypass the physics of the Matrix, to learn the skills, to jump from the one building to the other, until it gets to a point where the hero faces an obstacle that he or she cannot overcome alone. And that's usually when a mentor, a trainer, or some outside influence comes in. In this case, it's Morpheus and the Oracle telling Neo again that he needs to trust himself, that he has the capabilities to be the chosen one, until he finally manages to make this passage, to overcome it, and realize his or her potential to finally succeed. And the pivoting moment where he succeeds in this movie is when actually he stands in this corridor in the building and he stops the bullets of the agents. And suddenly we as a viewer will see the Matrix source code running, which is the clear indication that the hero has actually mastered his quest. And this is the traditional model of storytelling combined with empathy and the narration point. You have all that storytelling is about.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, Chris, you can see this version of storytelling in just about any big movie you've seen. I mean, we have a lot of examples, the Star Wars movies. You can see it in books. I think you can see it a lot of places. And so it's something that people are very familiar with.
Right. And watch out, the next time you watch a Disney movie with your children or you read them a bedtime story, maybe not the simplest children books, but quite soon, watch out for this paradigm. The hero discovers something, embarks on a mission, has challenges, faces a major obstacle, has outside input, overcomes it, and succeeds. It is everywhere. You cannot unsee it. And believe me, it's a bit of a curse. When I watch a movie with my wife, I always tell, oh, no, it's this point. Oh, no, it's this point. And sometimes she just goes, Chris, can I please watch a movie with my husband and not with a speaker coach? Just so much for the fun part. Now, Emily, that's all nice and beautiful, but I think we have to talk a bit about what storytelling is not.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to outline tonight some of the examples of what is not storytelling, because these are pitfalls that we see as a team in TEDx Lausanne quite often. When you are taking a long time to get to the point, it's not storytelling. People easily get bored, and it actually works against you in a lot of ways. I mean, if you think about song lyrics or children's stories like we just heard about, you start with the most important pieces of information, and you don't really waste time with any other extraneous details because people are interested in what's happening next in the action. We've been talking a lot lately about an example that people refer to as the so-called shortest story ever written. Maybe some of you know it. It's usually attributed to Hemingway. And it is a story that is complete in just 6 words. I'm going to tell you the story now. The story goes like this. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. So in 6 words, we have a lot that's happening there. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. You already have a sense that something's happened. You want to know more about what some of the details are. You can already tell that some things have already taken place beforehand. You've got a sense of a lot of things just within those 6 words. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about storytelling. This idea of making it hard to follow your thoughts. People often don't realize that with storytelling and with public speaking generally, structure matters. Standing up and speaking off the cuff seems like a great idea, but those examples and those anecdotes are key for storytelling. They really help you to build up, and we'll get to that later on in the webinar. Bottom line, keep it simple. Often, we hear from potential speakers. Well, I'm not an actor. I don't do theater. I cannot possibly be in public speaking. I'm a scientist. I'm a business person. I can't do this performance. That's not for me. The truth is that storytelling is being used by everyone, everywhere, all the time. Storytelling methods can be seen in political speeches. They can be seen in tech keynotes. You can see them in inspirational talks, etc. But they can be incredibly effective for things like office presentations, parenting, and even, like we mentioned before, at dinner parties. So it's something to keep in mind as you think about, going on beyond this webinar, how you can use storytelling in your own life. The other thing that comes up more often than not is that people assume that storytelling is limited to inspirational stories. This is something that we also hear quite a lot, is that the most recognizable storytelling formats are often inspirational. While that's accurate, it's not necessarily true for everything. Storytelling, as we mentioned, can be in different places for different reasons. And storytelling can be incredibly effective when you're trying to convince people about new ideas. It can be really effective when you're looking at things like how to pitch for investment. You can see it a lot in how really effective academics use storytelling to illustrate a point. So we would argue that it's much wider than that. The meat of our presentation, Chris, I think we're headed right into, is really about how to tell stories people will remember. We know that this is the reason that you're all here tonight. You all want to know a little bit more about this. And we'd like to spend the rest of our time with you this evening really focusing on some of the processes that you should keep in mind, some of the tactics, and then we'll get into some of the examples.
Yes, that's exactly right, Emily. Thank you for this wonderful transition. How to tell stories people will remember. The first and most important advice is get to the point quickly. There is no point at all of talking about it. Just say it how it is. Make us travel with you to the point where the action happens, right in the middle of it. Start strong and continue stronger. As we already said, and as I explained with the Matrix example, we need a hero. And Emily already said, we all need a hero. Of course we do. But in stories, we especially need a hero. Now, you might object and say, well, if I use storytelling at work, there is no hero. I don't want to use my boss because he gets all the recognition already. We understand. A hero means you need a character, a main person or entity that drives and rides through your story. That could be a team project. That could be the company itself. It doesn't necessarily have to be a human being, a hero, as we said earlier, but it needs a protagonist, an individual that is in the center of the story and that lives through whatever development is part of the story. Then build the examples and build them from least impactful to most impactful. But alert, please only select impactful and relevant examples, right? But among those, you may choose the most impactful last. It is not only a powerful chronology to build attention and to finish strong. You will see that while applying storytelling, it is naturally easier to talk about it that way because stories simply go this way. So it will also become easier for you to expand on your story and to simply tell it.
Yeah, there's a great flow when you work that way.
Yes, exactly. And lastly, end with good news or next steps. That might seem a little counterintuitive, especially if I think about I'm presenting a new project at work, but it isn't. Something you should never underestimate is the desire of us human beings, of listeners, to feel good about your speech or your story. And to create this completeness, this feel-good factor, we need a positive outlook, an ending, a link to the future. And again, it doesn't have to be the fairy tale happy ending. but it should be a link to the future. What's happening next? What is the upbeat notion that you end your story with? And you will realize that people feel they have closure, it's rounded, and it's positive. The effect is really not to be underestimated, believe us.
Yeah. I also just wanted to mention, Chris, we put this down here in the box as a pro tip, but it's worth mentioning because I think it often gets misconstrued when you're looking at how to present in public and how to speak to an audience. Just to mention that there is a reason that TED and TEDx talks are relatively short, and it is true that most people lose focus, even on the most interesting topics, by about 12 minutes or so. I will also add that if you haven't caught their attention very quickly in your story, you can lose them even faster.
Yes.
What does that mean? That means that you need to keep in mind when you're constructing your story and when you're getting ready to present, how long is this taking, really start to finish? What are the different points that I'm going to be looking at? And really keep that in mind. It's a really important element to mention now. I also think it's worth mentioning that we've seen incredibly impactful stories told in 6 minutes or less. This is something where the longer you go doesn't necessarily mean the better you are. And we can see this over and over again. Chris and I could do an entire webinar on only this topic around impactful talks and length associated. It's really important to keep that in mind as you go forward. As we transition, we'd like to give you our 3 steps towards a compelling story. We're into the tactics now. We're looking at how we can tell stories in varying contexts. We want to focus in on these 3 steps, and this is something that we use in TEDx Lausanne. The first, and obviously, as I mentioned, the real key to telling a compelling story is that you have to start strong. We want to know why we as the audience should care about your topic. And if we don't get there relatively quickly, it's really hard to get people back and focused on you if you've already sort of talked around the topic or mentioned some context. People are very quickly, first of all, bored, and second of all, very aware of something that doesn't seem genuine. So it's really important to start honest and to start strong. You really have to get to a point where you feel like within the first couple of sentences, you've got something that hooks the audience. Sometimes that can be as simple as a statement that makes people go, wait, what? Or you can have something that seems a bit controversial. Also, putting in a statement that doesn't sound like the beginning of a lecture is always a good idea. Those 15 first seconds really matter.
Yes, and then we go into the second step, which is escalating the tension. If you start strong and then you just let it dribble off and you don't follow up on it, you waste everything. You might actually create a worse effect than if you hadn't started strong, because it is inconsistent. And apart from sequencing your arguments, as we already mentioned, so putting them in an order that makes sense, that is logical for the story and easy to follow with the strongest last, you need to escalate the tension. And this is something I really want to insist on. It's all nice to talk about the situation, about a problem. Let's take an example. The Titanic hitting the iceberg. Well, that certainly is a problem, but you haven't escalated the tension yet. Me as an audience, I have not understood what the real problem is. Now, you can escalate it by saying, water is starting to run into the boat. The boat is taking water and starting to drown, which then escalates the tension of hitting the iceberg. And me as a listener, I understand that this requires a solution, which then can be the continuation of your story, your solution, your recommendation, if we speak about it more metaphorically. But escalating the tension from hitting the iceberg to the ship is taking water is a crucial step in storytelling. Secondly, the rule of 3 works really well. We as human beings, as listeners, find it easy to understand and remember 3 different points. And I'm sure you're all the keen observers we believe you are, that you've noticed that we actually applied it here. We have 3 different steps to a compelling story, with 3 different points. Well done, Emily. And lastly, you should keep it alive, please. You have started strong, you have escalated the tension, you need to keep that alive. Don't let go of the incredible energy you've constructed. And this is a point where you really make or break your story and the use of storytelling. You should come out of your story and talk to the audience. It means that you have immersed us in this story. We are with you. We are living what the hero is living. Now you can step out and talk to us on a one-to-one level. That way, you will amplify the effect of the story, of this meaningful message you've planted, and put it into a greater context. As an example, if I were to tell you about the car ride that I spent with my friends, that we were stuck in traffic and suddenly another car rear-ended us. That's the story, and now I'm not telling it as a story, but imagine we were there. And then I step out by saying something, okay, just imagine how we felt in that car on our way to holiday with an accident happening, knowing how much paperwork that can be in Switzerland. I'm stepping out and I'm putting it on a larger scale, on a bigger context, which amplifies the meaning and which puts you on the same level as me as an outside analytical person. And that really helps to solidify the message and to leverage the power you've built with a story. And especially, for example, in business contexts, it's a good way of linking storytelling to actual objective information, project guidelines, and so on.
Really important here, really important.
And I've already mentioned to end on a good note earlier, so I will not go further in detail, but
everybody loves a happy ending.
Exactly, everybody does. And it's important that you think of it. It doesn't need to be sugarcoating things, but it needs to end on a high, on a positive note. Again, people remember how they felt about your story. Don't lose that advantage of addressing this need. And when you tell your story, the delivery plays a major role. 70% of what we hear as a message is nonverbal, or at least these elements that are not explicitly put in words. So pauses are the most important and, in my opinion, most effective way of telling stories and presenting. A famous song was even written about it, which in the chorus goes something like, "You say it best when you say nothing at all." Now, I'm sure it was not exactly about storytelling per se, but still, it is as relevant as ever, and we use it often as an example. So pauses for effect when needed are good for the audience to understand and digest what you just said, and it just adds more impact to your message. So think about pauses.
As we move forward, let's look at some of the examples of effective storytelling. What we've done here is, rather than trying to walk you through many things in detail, what we've tried to do is to group a couple of examples based on some of the questions that we often get at TEDx Lausanne. So you'll see we've got kind of 3 different categories that we'd like to walk you through, and some ideas for places that you could go and watch either TED or TEDx Talks or other talks that are available online for free, where you can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about as storytelling examples. I wanted to focus first on presenting data. This is something that comes up a lot in Lausanne because we have such a large academic community and there's several universities. We get this question quite often about, well, I have incredible results, I have incredible stats, but I don't know how to present that in a way that people who aren't experts can really engage with. One of the examples that we wanted to start with is Hans Rosling. Maybe some of you know him. He was a very famous Norwegian scientist who's unfortunately no longer with us, who frankly gave a lot of talks using stories. What's interesting about Hans Rosling is that, first of all, he's presenting in English, which isn't his native language, but he's also presenting it in a way that engages the audience, not because he's a very poetic speaker or he's got a really interesting tone, but because he's using the stories to take you on a journey of that information. And there's a really great TEDx talk that he's done, which really shows some of the changing demographics in the world and uses that storytelling element. It's a good start if you're looking for that kind of an approach. And he's not necessarily what many people would call a really incredible speaker. The second is Jill Bolt Taylor. She's a neuroscientist who actually studied her brain function while she was having a stroke herself. So here we have an example of someone who's taken the information and the expertise that they have available to them and has really used it in real time for a story that has to do with something in her personal life. She does a really good job of balancing both the information that she wants you to learn with the story about what happened to her. It's another good one to check out.
The second category that we see a lot and that I think we all, not just as speaker coaches, are most familiar with is the category of inspirational, persuasive speakers that we've seen in all fields of our society and politics and other important subject fields. And we've selected just two of many that are outstanding at what they speak about. And the first one is Malala, the activist from Pakistan who speaks about education, especially female education. And we believe that she is a great example for storytelling for several reasons. Firstly, she does not speak a very, very fluent and good English. So when she presents about the topics that are so important to her in front of audiences such as the UN, she carefully selects her words. She takes time to correctly articulate them and to get her message across. It is a great example of people and a person who doesn't need to use a lot of connecting words to sort of enrich and blow up in a positive sense the message. It is about how you say it. And I think everyone watching her talks is left without a doubt that she roots for her cause, that she has credibility to speak about it. And I personally feel that the slightly slower way of articulating and speaking adds to the impact. So that is a good example of storytelling in persuasive speaking. The second example we have selected for today is Martin Luther King, the human rights activist who was assassinated, as we know. And he as well is certainly more of a traditional speaker, but he applies storytelling in such an empathetic and effective way that he can surely be considered one of the greatest orators of our times, because he speaks firstly about a subject which already at his time has been highly controversial. He speaks to audiences of which many are probably opposed to his views. Some, on the other hand, are overly enthusiastic about his views. But no matter the words he selected, no matter the location he spoke at, always he managed to put his deep conviction about his cause, his vision, his drive, his energy, his purpose in life into words that anyone could understand, from the simple worker to the highly educated academic. He touched them all with words and stories. So he made it simple to understand the higher purpose, the vision, even though many of the subjects he touched with racial equality and so on are actually really complex on a political scale and on a cultural, societal scale. Yet he managed to use storytelling to make it understandable and to make it experiential for any listener. So that's another fabulous example.
It's great that you brought that up, Chris, because actually that idea of making the complex incredibly simple really helps us to transition into this third category: tech, startups, investment. As you can imagine, this is something that we hear quite a lot. People who want to be using effective public speaking skills to talk about a new product, to talk about an innovation, to gain investment for their work. And Steve Jobs is a great example of that. Of course, we all know who Steve Jobs is. But I think it's important to note that when he first gave a keynote about the new iPhone, one of the things that he did was to apply this same tactic, to take something that was incredibly complex and sort of bring it down to a level of using very simple language, words, and even images. One of the things that's so remarkable about his storytelling technique is that when he presented the new iPhone, he put up a image on the screen that was kind of a box with an old style phone rotary dial. Now with that, he makes a joke and he says, oh, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. But of course, that is what he's trying to do, right? He in one image is telling you a story about how he wants to revolutionize the telephone, which he obviously did. And so we're using very simple images, simple language to be able to describe something that's incredibly complex, and people follow along. There's another great example that we wanted to highlight. Her name's Jacqueline Novogratz. She is the CEO of the Acumen Fund. They're a venture capital group that looks at global aid in some of the poorest places in the world, Africa and Asia. And she's someone who has an interesting backstory. She started in Wall Street, was an investment banker, and then shifted to work on this very interesting social enterprise venture capital approach. She's someone who, whenever she's presenting, and you can see this in her TEDx talk, she's got several, she uses the investment language, but she frames it around a story. So often you'll hear her say, I met so-and-so, he's an engineer in India, this is his job, this is his life, this is what he does. The next thing you know, as you're listening to her, you're following along with this guy's path. Well, what happened to him? Well, why couldn't he provide for his family? What else happened? Then how did you engage? You find that she is giving you the story of why this investment is important through this frame. And what we can see is that it's a really effective way to get people to understand exactly what's needed by using that very simple approach.
Wonderful. Very well wrapped up, Emily. And it was difficult to select these examples because we have so many in our minds. But we thought that if you watch those, you will get a clear understanding of the techniques used and learn something interesting.
Yeah.
So to wrap up the better part of this webinar, we have started by looking at how old of a concept and a strategy stories are to pass information from generation to generation and to preserve it, starting as early as in Greece, moving over Africa, the griots, and eventually touching most of us as children already at bedtime stories all around campfires. Then we've looked at what storytelling really is, where we just need the hero, we start right in the middle of the action, and we make an empathetic link. Remember, Neo from Matrix. And then we told you about how to apply storytelling. One of the elements were to get to the point quickly. Others were to escalate the tension, to start strong, and to raise and finish on a good note. And last but not least, we have shown you some examples of highly coached individuals and sometimes professional speakers who put this into practice. Now, it goes without saying that none of them do it on their own. It is perfectly fine, and especially for TEDx, these performances that are really a performance, to receive help, to brainstorm, and to rehearse. It's nothing that's just appearing overnight. But what we would like you to take away from this evening's session is that storytelling is not just for inspirational talks, even though we know it mostly from this area. It is an incredibly powerful and engaging frame for any content. And the more you move into an area where it's rarely applied, such as the workplace, the more you can impress, engage, and make people remember you when you use it. It doesn't need to be the major part of your presentation at work, for example. Oftentimes, it is just as little as 10% of everything you say, yet the impact it generates is far above 10%. It is an all-enveloping concept that makes people feel good about your talk. And that is what you really want to control and master.
Yeah. Great way to wrap up, Chris. As we're finalizing our presentation tonight, we did want to leave you with some additional resources. We felt really strongly about this because obviously a webinar like this isn't quite a training. It's really much more of a way to get you interested in these topics and to see what then interests you. As you can see on the left, we've done a collection of TED Talks that we felt were representative either of the process of storytelling, so to really talk about what elements are needed for storytelling, or also examples where we can see that storytelling is being very well articulated. And you can see some of those examples that we've listed, some of whom we've already mentioned. The hands rustling is already on there. Several people have indicated that Andrew Stanton's The Clues to a Great Story is a really great place to start. We would also recommend Chimamanda Adichie's, which talks about the importance of looking at storytelling from a holistic perspective. Talk Nerdy to Me by Melissa Marshall is around how to use data and statistics and present it in a very compelling way. And then a great example of storytelling in action is Do Schools Kill Creativity by Ken Robinson. Then on the right-hand side, you can see that we've listed some books to read. Some of them are much more theoretical about the theory of storytelling, how to build that, how to use the structure. One of them is called The Writer's Journey. Those are really fundamental texts. We've also included in here a couple of books that are less about theory and more about practicality. So Resonate by Nancy Duarte looks at how you can use infographics and information to really amplify presentations in an impressive way. Long Story Short is by a comedian who's won a couple of storytelling competitions in the US around how she uses humor and a kind of stand-up approach to telling stories. And Save the Cat is the Bible for writing plays and writing scripts for movies. A lot of people are referring back to this book as a great resource. So we just wanted to leave these with you as well so that you could take a look at what makes sense for your context and that you'd have a bit more resources to go a bit deeper.
All right, that's it for tonight.
We're here.
I would like to first of all thank Damien Gauthier, our colleague, again for moderating the chat, and he obviously won't leave us. He has curated the questions that we will soon move into because we've come now to the question and answer session. Before I open up the floor, I would just like to invite you to sign up to our newsletter, which you can do over our website, tedxlausanne.com. It will allow you to receive the latest information. You will, for example, learn as soon as we set a date for our 2021 event. We haven't done that yet. You will receive more information on future webinars that we do. You will also receive the link for the recording of this webinar, should you like to watch it again, check out some information or share. And we would like to invite you now, if you want to switch on your camera to ask us all of our questions. Emily, thank you very much for co-hosting with me. It was a great pleasure as always.
Thanks, Christopher. We had a great time and we hope you did too. And we're looking forward to all of your tough questions coming up next.
Exactly. So shoot, we're here for you. We still have time. And I suggest that we start with a couple of questions from the chat. Okay.